These are the 7 levels of global collapse. Level 1, the outbreak. This is where it all starts. That initial spark before anyone realizes the world is ending. A hospital reports strange bite victims. Maybe a lab accident gets covered up, or some idiot opens the wrong tomb. And 28 days later, it's animal rights activists releasing infected chimps that kick off the rage virus. While Resident Evil shows us Umbrella Corporation's T-virus leaking from an underground facility and turning Raccoon City into ground zero. The authorities still think they can contain it with quarantines and media blackouts, but infections are already spreading exponentially through densely populated areas. But here's what makes outbreaks so deadly in the first 72 hours. The infection doesn't spread randomly, it targets the exact people society needs to survive. In Kingdom, the zombie plague starts at a royal resurrection ceremony, meaning the first infected are nobles and guards with access to entire cities. The Resident Evil outbreak hits Raccoon City's underground labs first, turning scientists and security into carriers who spread it topside before anyone realizes the flu cases aren't flu. Patient Zero always seems to be connected to either high population density or critical infrastructure, like that organ trafficking ring in World War Z that puts infected tissue into wealthy recipients across the globe. And the authorities? They don't just fail to contain it, they actively make it worse. When Fear the Walking Dead shows LA's first responders, we see cops shooting rioters without understanding headshots are necessary, which means every takedown just creates another zombie once the body reanimates. The National Guard sets up quarantine zones but lets infected people through because nobody's testing for a virus that doesn't show up on any known medical scanner. It's not incompetence, it's that they're fighting an enemy that doesn't match any existing protocol. The scariest part of level 1 isn't the zombies, it's how fast normal people turn on each other. In All of Us Are Dead, a Korean high school becomes ground zero when a science teacher's experiment escapes, and within hours, students are barricading classrooms against their own friends. The infection spreads through a single building faster than emergency services can arrive, and by the time the military shows up, there are more infected teenagers than living ones. This is also when we see the first signs of that critical mistake I mentioned. Governments prioritize optics over action. In World War Z, China detains doctors who report strange symptoms because they don't want to admit a problem exists. The US downplays the outbreaks by referring to them as a new form of African rabies, and promotes an ineffective rabies vaccine called Phalanx to prevent panic and for profit. Every hour spent covering it up is another 100 infections. And by the time they admit the truth, we're already at level 2. Level 2, containment failure. The military rolls in thinking they can save the day, but they're fighting an enemy that turns their own casualties into reinforcements. 28 weeks later shows NATO forces establishing a safe zone in London with snipers, heavy artillery, and biohazard protocols. But one infected person breaks through and the whole operation collapses in minutes. The infection spreads faster than anyone predicted because every bitten soldier becomes another zombie, and traditional warfare tactics mean nothing when your enemy doesn't fear death. Cities get bombed, highways become parking lots of abandoned cars, and evacuation plans turn into stampedes that kill more people than the zombies. Here's the tactical nightmare militaries face. In Planet Terror, the US Army tries to establish quarantine perimeters around Texas using lethal force with guns. Zombies don't care about pain compliance. They don't retreat when gassed, they don't stop when tased, and shooting them in the chest just slows them down. And every military casualty becomes an enemy combatant. In conflicts like World War Z's Battle of Yonkers, the military sets up artillery, tanks, and air support against a million-strong zombie horde, but the undead don't break formation when shells explode. They just keep coming. Every bomb that lands short creates craters that slow down follow-up forces. Every position that gets overrun adds another 100 zombies wearing military gear and carrying weapons. This is when we see the classic images of tanks rolling through downtown streets and attack helicopters firing into crowds. The Walking Dead skips over most of this phase, but the flashbacks show us Atlanta being napalmed and refugee camps getting overrun. In World War Z, the Battle of Yonkers becomes the turning point where the US military's high-tech weapons prove useless against a million zombies that don't care about shock and awe. The government starts rationing supplies, martial law gets declared, and anyone showing symptoms gets shot on sight, which only makes people hide infections and spread them faster. This is when we start seeing the real mistake that dooms humanity, and it's not what you think. It's not the virus, it's not the zombies, it's the refusal to make the hard call. In Train to Busan, a corporate executive hides his bite because he's important. He's got connections. Surely there's a cure for people like him. He infects an entire train car. In The Walking Dead flashbacks, we see evacuation centers turning away people with fevers because they might be infected, which forces desperate families to hide symptoms and sneak into safe zones. The Atlanta refugee camp falls because nobody wants to shoot a kid who's running a temperature, even though protocol says anyone symptomatic gets quarantined or eliminated. The military makes the same mistake at scale. Commanders won't authorize firing on crowds of civilians pause until infected and uninfected are already mixed together. Politicians won't declare martial law until the riots have already spread to multiple cities. By the time Fear the Walking Dead shows LA under full military occupation, it's too late. The government is rationing ammunition because they've burned through stockpiles shooting every moving corpse, and the infected are still outnumbering the living 10-to-1 in urban areas. Level 3. Infrastructure collapse. Power plants shut down because there's nobody left to run them, and suddenly the modern world just stops working. The Last of Us shows us this transition perfectly, with Joel and Tess navigating a Boston where skyscrapers are dark, water only runs in certain zones, and Fedra uses brutal checkpoints to maintain whatever order they can. No electricity means no refrigeration, no communication, and no way to coordinate any kind of organized response. Hospitals become death traps, supermarkets get looted within days, and gas stations run dry as people flee to anywhere that might be safer. But the infrastructure collapse creates problems nobody saw coming. In Project Zomboid, the survivors who stockpiled generators run out of fuel. The ones who hoarded frozen food watched it rot. In The Last of Us, Boston's quarantine zone survives for 20 years, but only because Fedra maintains one functional power plant and rations electricity to a few city blocks. Everyone else lives in darkness, which means no refrigeration for medicine, no purified water, and no way to preserve food beyond salting and smoking. Water becomes the silent killer. Most cities depend on electric pumps to move water through pipes. When the power dies, taps run dry within days. The Walking Dead shows survivors drinking from streams and rivers, which works until you realize those same waterways are full of decomposing bodies from upstream. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid kill more people in the first year of collapse than zombies do, but nobody's making antibiotics anymore, and all the pharmacies have been looted. The social order breaks down even faster than the physical infrastructure. The Walking Dead's governor starts out as a genuine leader trying to save Woodbury, but the constant pressure turns him into a warlord who keeps walker heads in aquariums and rules through fear. Police and military units either desert their posts or become warlords themselves. The problem isn't that people become evil. It's that good leadership in an apocalypse requires doing things that would be monstrous in normal times. You have to exile sick people who might infect others. You have to let strangers die rather than risk your supplies. You have to execute anyone who threatens the group's survival, even over minor theft. In Dawn of the Dead, we see this play out in a shopping mall where a small group of survivors initially cooperates. But resource scarcity breeds paranoia. Who gets to sleep in the comfortable furniture stores? Who has to stand watch on the cold rooftop? When a biker gang tries to raid the mall, the survivors have to decide whether to negotiate, share, or fight to the death over a building full of stuff they could never use in 100 lifetimes. They choose violence, and half of them die defending products they don't need. Level 4. Regional extinction. Entire continents go dark as zombie hordes consume everything in their path, and survivors scatter into isolated pockets. World War Z depicts this through interviews with people who watched countries fall, from India's collapse leaving 1 billion zombies wandering the subcontinent to Russia's brutal retreat behind the Urals. The sheer numbers become impossible to fight, with zombies forming massive herds that devour everything like locusts. And any large concentration of humans just attracts more undead than anyone can handle. Safe zones get overrun one by one. Refugee fleets sink in the oceans, and air travel stops when there's nowhere safe left to land. The numbers at this stage are incomprehensible. World War Z's interviews reveal that India's collapse left over hundreds of millions zombies wandering the subcontinent, a mass of undead so large that it creates its own weather patterns from body heat and decomposition gases. Russia retreats behind the Urals and uses nuclear demolitions to seal mountain passes, trapping 100 million infected west of the line. Africa becomes entirely dark on satellite imagery because there's no one left to run power plants, and the few survivors are scattered across a continent-sized graveyard. Island nations learn that isolation isn't salvation. In Zombie 2, a single infected person washing ashore on a Caribbean island triggers total collapse within weeks. New Zealand reports similar scenarios where fishing boats arrive with zombified crews, and by the time coastal patrols sink every approaching vessel, the infection has already spread inland from port cities. Even Antarctica isn't safe. Research stations face infected personnel who went mad from isolation, and the frozen zombies from previous outbreaks thaw when spring arrives. Communication between survivor groups becomes rare or impossible. The Walking Dead shows us Rick's group discovering that the CDC is dead, the government is gone, and they're truly on their own in a world where the living are outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Military bases fall, island nations get infected by washed-up corpses, And even remote areas aren't safe because people bring the infection with them when they flee. This is when survivors stop hoping for rescue and start thinking in terms of pure day-to-day survival. And here's that brutal truth I promised at the start. Humanity is functionally extinct, right here at level 4, even though millions of people are still alive. The genetic bottleneck is too severe. Mathematical models show you need at least 500 to 10,000 breeding individuals with genetic diversity to sustain a species long-term. At level 4, there are maybe a few 100,000 survivors scattered across the entire planet, isolated in groups of 10 to 100, with no way to reach each other. Even if every survivor lived to old age, we've already lost too much genetic diversity to avoid eventual extinction from inbreeding. The knowledge base is gone too. In The Walking Dead, we meet a former surgeon who can't perform operations anymore because there's no anesthesia, no antibiotics, no sterilization equipment. A mechanical engineer can't fix generators without replacement parts. A farmer can't grow crops without seeds or fertilizer. Every person who dies takes their skills with them, and the survivors are disproportionately young and unskilled because trained professionals tended to be in cities when they fell. Within 50 years, assuming anyone survives that long, humanity will have regressed to medieval technology levels. So, if we're already doomed, why does it keep getting worse? Because what comes next isn't about survival anymore. It's about what humans and zombies become when there's nothing left to lose. Level 5. Planetary saturation. The zombies have won, and humanity is reduced to scattered bands hiding in the ruins of civilization. The Walking Dead spends most of its runtime in this level, showing groups like Alexandria, the Kingdom, and the Saviors fighting over scraps, while millions of walkers roam the countryside. Nature doesn't wait for humans to recover. The Last of Us. Part 2 shows Seattle 25 years into the collapse, where trees grow through skyscrapers and vines tear apart highways. Without humans to maintain dams, rivers flood cities. Without controlled burns, wildfires consume forests and spread to suburbs. In I Am Legend, New York becomes overgrown jungle within 3 years, with deer running through Times Square and lions hunting in Manhattan because zoo animals escaped when keepers died. The world doesn't miss us, and the zombie hordes evolve their own ecosystem. In World War Z, frozen zombies in Canada and Russia remain perfectly preserved, creating millions of time bomb corpses that will thaw when climate patterns shift. Ocean floors are covered in walking corpses that can't drown, slowly migrating along continental shelves. Some eventually wash ashore, others just stay down there forever. A permanent undead population that makes beaches deadly anywhere in the world. Nature starts reclaiming cities. As vines grow through abandoned buildings, animals return to urban areas, and the whole planet becomes a graveyard dotted with survivor camps that constantly relocate to avoid herds. Resources are so scarce that a working car or a can of beans is worth killing over, and communities wage wars over farmland and ammunition. The real threat isn't even the zombies anymore, it's other survivors who've become just as monstrous. The Walking Dead's Negan operates a protection racket where communities give up half their supplies or get slaughtered, with survivors burned alive as examples. The Whisperers wear zombie skins and live among the dead, rejecting all aspects of civilization. When Rick's group tries to negotiate peace, the Whisperers respond by planting pike-mounted heads along the border as a territorial warning. But some groups maintain order through even darker methods. The Walking Dead's terminus starts as a sanctuary offering refuge to all travelers, but cannibalism becomes policy when food runs out. They radio Sanctuary for All specifically to lure in fresh meat, processing refugees like livestock. The residents aren't monsters. They're former accountants and teachers who made the logical choice when starvation was the alternative. In DayZ, players experience this firsthand when other survivors are more dangerous than the infected because humans can plan ambushes, steal your gear, and shoot you in the back for a can of food. That's the horror. They're not wrong by apocalypse math. They're just doing what has to be done to survive. Level 6. Evolutionary adaptation. After decades of stagnation, the zombies start changing in horrifying new ways. The cordyceps infection in The Last of Us represents the worst-case evolutionary scenario. Stage 1, runners still think like humans and can coordinate ambushes. Stage 2, stalkers hide in dark corners and leap out with predatory intelligence. Stage 3, clickers are blind but hunt by echolocation with perfect accuracy. Stage 4, bloaters are walking biological weapons that release spore clouds, creating infection zones that remain deadly for years. And Stage 5 spoilers for Part 2 are the Rat King, a mass of fused infected that's basically an undead kaiju. All of Us Are Dead introduces a hybrid student who gets infected but retains full intelligence and enhanced physical abilities, creating a super soldier variant that's faster and stronger than both humans and zombies. If that mutation spreads, survivors go from fighting mindless corpses to fighting undead that can plan, set traps, and use weapons. Some zombies develop pack hunting behaviors, others become ambush predators, and the really old ones turn into stationary spore factories that can infect entire buildings. Humanity isn't idle either, but their adaptations are just as disturbing. The Walking Dead shows us people born after the outbreak who've never known a world without walkers, kids who learn to gut zombies before they learn to read, and communities that use walker herds as weapons against rival groups. The Whisperers take it to the extreme by wearing zombie skin and walking among the dead, essentially becoming a hybrid of human intelligence and zombie camouflage. In I Am Legend, the infected develop intelligence and social structures, turning from mindless monsters into a new dominant species that hunts the last humans, like we're the real monsters. This level is where the line between survivor and zombie starts to blur, whether through infection variants, psychological breakdown, or deliberate choices to embrace the horror. The psychological evolution might be worse than the physical. The Walking Dead's Whisperers aren't mutants, they're humans who've decided civilization is the disease and zombies are the cure. They view walkers as the natural state of existence and living humans as the aberration. When Alpha, their leader, explains her philosophy, it's disturbingly logical. Walkers don't wage wars, don't hoard resources, don't rape or murder each other. They simply exist. By becoming like them, the Whisperers have achieved a Zen-like acceptance of death that makes them functionally unkillable because they don't fear the one thing that terrifies everyone else. In I Am Legend, the infected develop a counter-society with social hierarchies, hunting tactics, and coordinated attacks on the protagonist's stronghold. They're not just surviving, they're evolving into a new dominant species with their own culture. The book's ending reveals they view the protagonist as the monster, the vampire who emerges in daylight to murder their people while they sleep. From their perspective, they're the heroes fighting the extinction of their species. That's the real horror of Level 6, the possibility that zombies aren't an apocalypse. They're the next phase of human evolution, and we're the dinosaurs refusing to accept extinction. Level 7, Total Extinction. The endgame where humanity's chapter closes and the zombies inherit whatever's left of Earth. World War Z book hints at this with the frozen zombies in the Arctic and ocean floors covered in walking corpses that might never decay, suggesting a planet where the dead literally outnumber anything that ever lived. Without humans to hunt, zombies would theoretically enter a dormant state, standing motionless in cities and forests like a planet-sized graveyard where nothing moves. But some stories explore what happens if zombies can't truly die. Return of the Living Dead establishes that its zombies are unkillable by conventional means. You can burn them, dismember them, destroy the brain, and they keep moving. The military's solution is nuclear strikes, which just spreads radioactive zombie ash into the atmosphere, creating acid rain that reanimates anything it touches. Every subsequent film in that series shows the problem of compounding. More nukes, more ash, more zombies, until the entire planet is contaminated, and the timescale becomes geologically horrifying. The Zombie Survival Guide speculates that without prey, zombies enter dormancy but remain viable for decades or centuries. Frozen specimens could last thousands of years, preserved in ice like mammoths. Future civilizations, if any emerge, would face a planet where disturbing ancient ruins release swarms of prehistoric zombies. Archaeological digs become death traps, construction projects that break ground risk unleashing buried hordes. Earth doesn't recover, it becomes permanently haunted. Some stories explore what happens after humanity loses. The Rising by Brian Keene goes supernatural, with demons possessing corpses and actively wiping out all life. Not just humans, but animals, and even plants, until Earth is a dead rock orbiting the sun. Marvel Zombies takes it cosmic when zombified superheroes consume all life in their universe, and then start portal hopping to other dimensions for more food, turning extinction into a multiversal event. The scariest part of Level 7 isn't the zombies anymore, it's the silence. The idea that all our cities and monuments and art become meaningless ruins that nobody will ever see again. This is the level where recovery isn't just unlikely, it's literally impossible, because there's nothing left to recover from, and nobody left to do the recovering. But here's the really messed up part that nobody talks about. In some versions, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning of something worse. Marvel Zombies shows what happens when the infection hits beings with cosmic powers. Zombified superheroes retain their abilities and intelligence, but gain an insatiable hunger. They consume every living thing on Earth in days, then start opening portals to other dimensions for more food. The infection spreads across the multiverse, creating a plague of universe-hopping undead gods. Spider-Man, infected and self-aware, watches himself eat Mary Jane and can't stop because the hunger overrides everything. Deceased gives us a digital version where the infection spreads through screens. Darkseid's anti-life equation becomes becomes a zombie virus transmitted through any electronic display. People who look at infected screens turn instantly, which means every phone, every TV, every computer becomes a weapon. In a hyper-connected world, Level 7 happens in hours. And because the source is digital, destroying all zombies doesn't stop it. The virus exists in the code, waiting for someone to reboot a server or power up an old device. Earth becomes a planet where technology itself is the enemy, and the only way to prevent reinfection is permanent Dark Age. And then there's the cosmic horror angle. The Rising by Brian Keene reveals that zombies aren't caused by viruses, but by demons from another dimension possessing corpses. When they've consumed all life on Earth, they move to other planets. The zombie apocalypse isn't humanity's end. It's a universal cycle that's already destroyed countless worlds. We're just the latest. The book ends with possessed zombies achieving space travel, heading to other inhabited systems, implying that the entire universe will eventually be nothing but demon-animated corpses floating through empty space. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to see the 7 levels of zombie apocalypse, click the video on the screen.